The sun was just beginning to rise over the green river, casting pale orange light across the water, making it shimmer like a secret it was struggling to hold. Mist hugged the banks, thick and low, clinging to the reeds and rocks like a warning. A jogger, early as always, ran his familiar route along the edge, his breath clouding in the cool morning air. He almost didn't see it. At first, he thought it was a bundle of clothes. But as he moved closer, the shape took on a horrifying familiarity. A pale foot, motionless and bare, protruding from the brush. He froze, his stomach turned, and in the cold stillness, the only sound was the whisper of the river. When King County deputies arrived, they knew this wasn't the first, and it wouldn't be the last. The young woman, estimated to be in her early 20s, was found partially submerged, her body positioned like a discarded doll. But one detail stood out more than any other: her shoes were missing. No prints around her, no sign of a struggle, just the river, always the river, and the silence of the forest. Detective Molly Carver had been on the force for 11 years, and nothing quite got under her skin like this case. It was too clean, too quiet, too purposeful. She stood over the body, hands on her hips, eyes narrowed. "It's him again," she murmured. "You sure?" Her partner, Detective Ray Howell, asked, stepping carefully along the bank. "Yeah, same staging, same type, and the shoes, always the shoes." By the end of that week, another body surfaced, and another, all near water, all women, all missing their shoes. The press called him the River Phantom. The FBI called him a pattern. But on the streets of Seattle, fear had a name: the man who hunted near the water. He was invisible, methodical, and most terrifying of all, he was consistent. Behind the scenes, a task force formed. Dozens of officers pored over files, photos, evidence bags. There were maps of rivers, photos of shoes found miles away from bodies, interviews with survivors who might have escaped. But Gary Ridgway's name? It wasn't even on the radar. Not yet. Across town, in a small gray house tucked between two lots, Gary Ridgway washed his hands. He did it carefully, thoroughly, humming as he did. His garage smelled faintly of bleach. A pair of muddy boots sat by the door. No one noticed him. No one looked twice. He was quiet, punctual, and worked at the truck factory without complaint. To his neighbors, Gary was just another man trying to get by. But behind his dull eyes, something darker stirred. A hunger, plan. He kept a box hidden in his crawlspace. In it, mementos. Not trophies, he told himself, reminders. Bits of jewelry, strands of hair, a lipstick tube, and a single unlaced shoe. Detective Carver stood before the task force, pointing to a map littered with red pins. He knows these rivers. He knows where the current takes them. He's not dumping them at random, he's staging them, presenting them. An analyst raised her hand. "Then why the shoes?" Carver paused. "It's psychological. Control. Maybe humiliation. But definitely ritual." Weeks turned to months. The body count rose. Families wept. Headlines screamed. Still, the shoes never turned up. And Gary? He smiled as he passed the memorials on his way to work. He liked the flowers. The notes. They made him feel remembered. He delivered pizza once to a house that had a missing poster on the door. He stared at the face. The girl had laughed at him when he was younger, called him slow. She wasn't laughing now. Detective Carver didn't sleep much. The case files haunted her. She stared at the victims' photos, tracing their lives backward, trying to find the junction where they intersected with a monster. She had a hunch. The trucking routes. Several victims were last seen near highways where delivery drivers operated. She began pulling employment records, scanning for overlaps, faces that kept appearing in the background. And there he was, quiet Gary. No priors, no red flags, just a name, just a shadow. But sometimes shadows hide more than just darkness. She requested a surveillance order. Her captain hesitated. "You think he's the guy?" Carver nodded. "I don't know what he is yet, but he's not what he pretends to be." That night, Gary sat in his living room watching the news. Another body found. Another candlelight vigil planned. He felt something stir in his chest. Not guilt, not fear, something closer to satisfaction. Outside, a car parked across the street. Inside, Gary slipped off his shoes, lined them neatly by the door. He smiled. The hunt had only just begun. Detective Molly Carver sat hunched over a stack of files in the dim task force office. The coffee had long gone cold, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the hum of exhausted typing was the only rhythm keeping her awake. One by one, the names of the missing women played through her mind like a broken record. None of them deserved what happened. None of them had answers. Only patterns, only water, and always the missing shoes. I pulled Gary Ridgway's work schedule, Howell said as he stepped into the office. He dropped a manila folder on her desk. He was clocked in near each disappearance. That's 3 locations that line up perfectly. Carver flipped through it, eyes narrowing. And he drives for a fleet company, has access to highways, rural stops, remote delivery points. Still not enough, Howell warned. He's clean. Nothing sticks. She nodded slowly. Then we need him to slip. The next week, surveillance on Gary Ridgway intensified. An unmarked van sat outside his home. Cameras monitored his driveway. He was followed on his routes. But Gary, in his quiet, methodical way, gave them nothing. He lived like a ghost. Until one night, a break. A woman named Angela, a sex worker from Aurora Avenue, walked into the precinct, bruised, shaking. He choked me, she said, out by the river. I played dead. I got away. Carver leaned forward. Do you remember what he looked like? Angela nodded slowly. Yeah, I do. He was calm, like he'd done it before. She picked Gary's photo from a lineup without hesitation. That gave them probable cause. The search warrant came down the next day. They raided Ridgway's home early, before dawn. His garage was pristine, almost sterile. But behind a panel in the wall, they found it, the box. Inside, the missing one heel, a necklace matching a victim's ID photo, buttons, torn fabrics. Each one, a silent confession. Gary said nothing as they led him away. Carver stood in the now empty garage, her breath caught in her throat. We got him, Howell whispered, but Carver didn't smile. No, she said softly. We found his shrine. Now we need his graveyard. In interrogation, Gary sat motionless, his hands clasped, his eyes downcast. Why the shoes? Carver asked. No formal charge. No recording yet. He finally looked up. Because they walked away, he whispered. Carver shivered. Gary Ridgway would eventually confess to dozens of murders. But the number kept growing. And for every name he gave, there were 2 more who never had one. Outside the station, a storm rolled in, and the river kept whispering. For more chilling true crime content, subscribe to the channel. The rain hadn't stopped in 3 days. Streets overflowed. The Green River ran fast and high, threatening to breach its banks. As the task force worked around the clock in the command center, Molly Carver's eyes were bloodshot, her fingers trembling from too much caffeine and too little sleep. Then the phone rang. A hiker, just outside Enumclaw, had spotted something washed up near the riverbed. Carver and Howell arrived on scene just as officers pulled a body from the muddy embankment. Female, mid-20s, partial remains. She had no ID, no personal belongings. But Carver noticed immediately no shoes. The me on site handed her a Ziploc bag. Inside was a bracelet engraved with the name Kathy. Back at the precinct, Carver rifled through old missing persons reports until she found it. Kathy Monroe, reported missing 8 months ago. Last seen near the truck stop. Carver checked Ridgway's delivery records. He had a route there that same day. This wasn't coincidence. It was confirmation. They called in the families, showed photos, gathered DNA. Every positive match was a knife in someone's heart, and another nail in Gary's coffin. But even with mounting evidence, something gnawed at Carver. The victims Ridgway confessed to didn't match the growing list of missing women. His numbers were vague, inconsistent. It was like he was keeping count, but not telling the full story. Why lie about how many? Howell asked one night as they sat in the dark, watching the rain smear the windows. Because each one is control, Carver answered. Each number is power. The more he keeps to himself, the more control he has. She walked back to the evidence room, stared at the collection of shoes that had been recovered. Some were matched, some weren't. They were lined on a shelf, mute testimony to the lives lost. As Carver left the room, she felt it. That same whisper of the river. The sense that something bigger was still just beneath the surface. Gary had told them what he wanted them to know. But the river knew everything, and it wasn't done talking. A sharp wind pushed through the Pacific Northwest woods, rustling pine needles and shaking loose the scent of rain-soaked bark. It was late fall, and Detective Molly Carver found herself staring at another stretch of remote land along the Green River, her boots sinking slightly into the mud. She looked around the clearing where the scent of decay lingered, where another victim had just been found. Same pattern, same haunting consistency. Missing shoes. The body was discovered by a pair of hikers who had veered off the trail. She was young, barely 20, and had likely been there for months. Her remains were concealed beneath a shallow layer of dirt and moss, but someone had taken great care to cover her face with a shirt, folded carefully, almost tenderly. Carver crouched beside the forensic team, who were brushing away soil like archaeologists unearthing ancient truth. "This one's been here a while," the lead tech said, "but it's the same. Shoe size matches the last three. Ligature marks. Defensive wounds. Any sign of the shoes?" He shook his head. "Nothing but socks." Carver stood, her breath fogging in the cold morning air. "It's not random," she muttered. "This forest means something to him." Back at the station, the task force was abuzz. Gary Ridgway had clammed up after his first brief confession. He'd admitted to a handful of murders, but everyone knew there were more. Many more. He talked like he was doing them a favor, but he never gave them the full truth. Detective Ray Howell walked in with a box of case files. Another Jane Doe came in from the edge of Kent. Same area Ridgway's truck route passed every Wednesday for 3 years. Carver took the file and sat down. A moment later, she sighed. "It's like looking at shadows in fog. You know the monster's there, but the shape keeps changing." Howell leaned against the wall. "You think he's still holding out?" She looked up, eyes tired. "No, I think he's enjoying it." In his cell, Ridgway stared at the wall, blinking slowly, as if the silence held secrets only he could hear. His lawyer had advised him to cooperate, to negotiate confessions for a lighter sentence. But Ridgway wasn't interested in leverage. He was interested in memory. "You don't know their names," he said softly during a session with the profiler. "But I do. I remember the way they smelled. I remember the sound of the dirt when I dug." The profiler tried to hide his discomfort. "Why the woods? Why not just dump the bodies?" "Because the trees don't talk," Ridgway replied. "And because I liked visiting them." The task force focused on mapping every inch of the forest where Ridgway had worked, lived, or passed through. They divided the region into grids and started searching, one painful square at a time. And then came the shoe. It was a single ballet flat, pink and scuffed, found miles from the nearest trail. Next to it, buried shallowly, they found bone fragments and fabric consistent with a missing girl reported 2 years earlier. Carver stared at the find, emotion flashing behind her eyes. He's not just hiding them, he's marking territory. They began calling the sites gardens. Dozens of them. Fields of silence where Ridgway had planted his darkness. A week later, Ridgway surprised them. "I'll show you one," he said. "But only her." He pointed to Carver. The captain hesitated. "You don't have to go alone." But Carver nodded. "He wants control. I'll give him just enough to talk." They drove in silence. Ridgway, in shackles, guided her through rural backroads with eerie precision. Finally, they stopped near a creek, and he nodded toward the trees. "She's there, under the big stone." Carver followed his gaze, and together with a forensics team, they unearthed skeletal remains. A small bracelet was still around one wrist. "I liked her," he said almost fondly. "She didn't scream. Most of them screamed." Carver's jaw tightened, but she didn't speak. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. "You think you're smarter than me?" he asked, smirking. "No," she said quietly. "Just better." Ridgway didn't respond, but his eyes narrowed. A flicker of something crossed his face. Something not quite human. Back at headquarters, another box was delivered from evidence. Inside were dozens of shoes collected from different crime scenes over the years. Most never matched a body. But now, with Ridgway talking, at least partially, they could start closing the gaps. But Carver didn't feel closure. Not yet. Not with so many names still missing. One night, she stayed late at the office, staring at a wall of photographs. Victim after victim. Different faces. Same end. Then she noticed it, a pattern in the location data Ridgway had given. It wasn't random. The distances between sites weren't just about concealment. They formed a shape, pattern, a map. "Ray!" she called, heart pounding. "Look at this." He stepped in, puzzled. "What is it?" "If we connect the dots, look, it's not just scattershot. He's building something. Or maybe honoring something." The map formed a spiral, and at its center, an untouched patch of forest. Never searched, never questioned. Carver whispered, "That's where he started." And the next morning, with the task force in tow, they would go there. To the beginning, to the seed of the monster. And as the wind howled through the trees, Detective Molly Carver wondered what the forest would reveal next. Because it wasn't done talking. Not yet. For more chilling true crime content, subscribe to the channel. The chill of the early morning air clung to Detective Molly Carver as she stepped into the patch of forest Ridgway had pointed out. This was it, the center of the spiral. The one place untouched until now. Birds scattered from the branches above, sensing the tension that humans always brought with them when they arrived searching for death. Carver moved cautiously, flanked by forensic teams, deputies, and a K-9 unit. Her boots sank into the wet moss, each step muffled by the forest floor. She could smell decay before she saw anything. And then, almost gently, the dog gave a signal. The team gathered. Beneath a half-rotten tree stump, they uncovered her, or what was left of her. Bones, a tattered piece of floral fabric, a lock of hair. But what stood out, what made everyone go silent, was the perfectly placed pair of shoes next to the shallow grave. Size 7. Red. "She's different," said one tech, breaking the silence. Carver nodded. "She's the first." The team worked in silence, reverently lifting the remains. The air hung heavy with the weight of that realization. This was the beginning, the seed Ridgway had planted, and from this grave had grown a forest of death. Back at headquarters, a forensic anthropologist confirmed it. The remains belonged to Teresa H., a missing woman from nearly 2 decades ago. The pattern now had its origin. Ray Howell leaned against Carver's desk, looking over the updated caseboard. So he starts with a ritual, the shoes placed perfectly, and over time, the ritual degrades. "Because he got careless," Carver replied. "Or because the need to kill outgrew the need to remember. Or maybe," she thought, "he didn't want to remember them anymore." Carver looked at the shoes again, clean, unworn, as if they had been meant for someone else. Meanwhile, Ridgway had stopped talking. Since showing them the site, he'd returned to his cell and hadn't said another word. Not to his lawyer, not to his therapist, not even to the guards. Carver was called in again. She entered the interview room and sat across from him. For a while, they said nothing, just stared at each other. Finally, she spoke. "We found her." Ridgway blinked. "I knew you would. Why did you bury her there?" He tilted his head slightly. "Because that's where I became who I am." She felt her stomach twist. "You mean that's where you became a killer?" He shrugged. "I didn't kill her like the others. I held her." She cried. "I cried." Carver leaned forward. "But you killed her anyway." He gave the faintest smile. "Everyone's got a first love, detective." She stood and left the room. No more games. He wanted to stain her mind, mark her with his madness. She wouldn't give him the power. The deeper the investigation went, the darker the truths became. New evidence linked Ridgway to over 80 victims. The number climbed as they mapped more gardens. The shoes became a silent testimony. Not all graves had them, but when they did, they spoke louder than words. One of the crime scene analysts began matching shoe brands and styles to missing persons reports. What they found was chilling. Some of the shoes were purchased years after the victim's disappearance. Some were never reported at all. "He kept killing long after we thought he stopped," Ray muttered, going through a fresh stack of files. Carver sat beside him, her face pale. "These aren't souvenirs. They're trophies. And offerings." Offerings to what? To himself. One late night, a young rookie officer approached Carver's desk. "Detective," he said hesitantly, "there's a woman outside. She says she knew Ridgway back then. Said she might have been his next victim." Carver stood. "Bring her in." The woman, in her late 40s now, shook as she sat. Her eyes darted to the photos on the wall. "I was 19, she began. "He picked me up by the highway. Said he'd take me to dinner." She recounted how something felt off. How he drove into the woods and suddenly changed demeanor. How she lied. Said she was pregnant, said her boyfriend was a cop. I think that's the only reason he let me go." Carver nodded slowly. "Thank you. You just helped us fill another gap." And another grave was placed on the map. At the end of the week, the captain called the team together. Over 40 new sites identified. Forensics still working through remains. The FBI updating databases. And Gary Ridgway remained silent. But Detective Carver had a feeling. He wasn't done. One more piece. One more grave. One more revelation was coming. She stared at the map one more time, and her eyes locked on a spot Ridgway had mentioned once, casually in an earlier interview. A rest stop, off Route 18. Never searched. Carver whispered to herself, "That's where the story ends, or begins again, because monsters never bury their secrets too deep. Not when they want to be found." And Gary Ridgway? He was still playing the game. The Garden of Bones had not yet finished blooming. The sun hadn't yet risen when the team set out. A thick fog clung to the earth like breath on cold glass, wrapping the trees in a soft, oppressive silence. Detective Molly Carver sat in the passenger seat of the lead vehicle, a satellite map on her lap. The spiral pattern they'd uncovered from Gary Ridgway's dump sites pointed to one final, untouched location. A dense, neglected part of the woods near Auburn. No trails, no signs, no witnesses. "You really think he started here?" Detective Ray Howell asked as he maneuvered the SUV through the muddy access road. Carver nodded slowly. "It's not just about where the bodies were dumped. It's how they were arranged. The spiral pattern isn't random. It's intentional. A beginning and end. And this is the center." The forest grew darker the deeper they drove. At last, the team stopped and hiked in on foot. With every step, the crunch of leaves and snapping of twigs seemed louder than it should have been, amplified by the collective tension of the search party. An eerie quiet hung over the clearing they reached. It was ordinary, too ordinary, but Carver could feel it, a kind of invisible pressure in the air, like something buried deep beneath their boots still pulsed with unfinished stories. The cadaver dogs picked up a scent almost immediately. They barked and strained, noses to the ground. The team marked the site and began to dig. 2 hours later, they found the first set of remains. Then a second. Then a third. By noon, they'd unearthed 5, all in one location. Carver stood in the middle of it, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, trying to contain the sickening chill that climbed her spine. "Why here?" Howell whispered. "Because this is where he became who he is," Carver said. "This isn't just a graveyard. This is a shrine." Back at the precinct, the mood was grim. The media had gotten wind of the new discovery, and pressure from victims' families and the public was mounting. Ridgway, shackled and expressionless, was brought into the interrogation room again. Carver sat across from him. "We found it. The center." He blinked. "You found her." Carver's heart skipped. "Who?" Ridgway leaned forward slightly. The first. Her hands clenched under the table. What was her name? He gave a crooked smile. Does it matter now? Carver stared at him, resisting the urge to shout. It matters to her. Silence. Then he said, Sandra. She worked at the diner off 212. She smiled at me, said she liked my cologne. That was all it took. Carver swallowed hard. Why the shoes, Gary? Why did you always take their shoes? His eyes lit up, like a child remembering a toy. Because they walked in them. They carried their lives, their stories. When I took them, I kept a part of them that nobody else would understand. The evidence from the new site was overwhelming. Forensics identified 3 of the 5 victims, all cold cases dating back over 2 decades. The final 2, no match. Carver stared at their reconstructed facial models. Young women, maybe teens. How many more were there? That night, she sat in her car outside her apartment, staring into the dark. Her phone buzzed. It was Ray. You should see this. Come back. In the evidence room, Ray had laid out photographs of all the known burial sites. Using the spiral overlay, he pointed out the connections. Every spot we found forms a perfect Fibonacci spiral. But get this, it continues. Beyond the site we thought was the center. Carver squinted. There's more. There's one more. At the end of the line, northwest of Seattle, near the water. She stared at the point on the map. Why didn't we see this before? Because it was outside our jurisdiction. The coordinates put it on old federal land, a decommissioned ranger station. Carver nodded slowly. Then that's where we go next. As dawn approached, they drove in silence toward the site. The abandoned ranger station stood like a relic from another era. Boarded up windows, rusted fencing, and the faint scent of mildew and decay in the air. They entered carefully. Dust coated every surface. Rodent droppings and spider webs in every corner. But beneath the floorboard in the back room, the dogs signaled again. Another body. Only this time it wasn't just bones. Wrapped in decaying plastic, a full set of clothes, a wallet, and a driver's license remained. And something else. Pair of women's shoes. Polished, untouched, perfectly preserved. Carver stepped back, staring at the shoes, then the ID. It was Sandra, the first. The circle was complete, but the echo of the forest still rang in her ears. Because even though Ridgway was behind bars, the ground still whispered. And the spiral might not end with him. Not yet. For more chilling true crime content, subscribe to the channel. The decommissioned ranger station had been empty for years, forgotten by most and claimed by nature. Moss clung to its rotting wooden frame, and ivy strangled the once visible signage. But inside that decaying shell of a building, something darker had been preserved. Sandra's body, Ridgway's first, his beginning, had been resting there for over 2 decades, hidden beneath the warped planks of the back room floor. Detective Molly Carver stood motionless, staring at the recovered shoes placed neatly beside the wrapped remains. They weren't weathered or damaged like the others. They were whole, protected, cherished. He didn't just kill her, she whispered to Howell, who stood beside her. He preserved her, like a trophy. Ray Howell shook his head slowly. He started the spiral here, and then buried his guilt outward. Carver corrected him softly. Not guilt, ritual. The forensic team began carefully cataloging everything in the room: fibers, prints, soil samples. But the silence between the investigators was heavier than any evidence. They all understood what this meant. Sandra wasn't just the first victim. She was the reason the rest existed. Back at the precinct, the atmosphere felt like the lull after a storm. But it was not relief. It was the uncertainty that comes after finding an answer you were never prepared to face. Ridgway was brought into the interview room one final time. Carver entered, placed the photo of Sandra's preserved shoes on the table, and stared him down. You kept her different. Why? Ridgway looked at the image with something resembling tenderness. She was the first person who ever looked at me like I mattered. I wanted to stop. After her. I really did. Carver's voice cracked. But you didn't. No, he admitted. Because the silence after her was too loud. The craving didn't go away. It just changed. You buried your humanity with her, didn't you? Howell added from the corner. Ridgway didn't answer. Instead, he smiled faintly, a man cradling memories that only brought horror to the rest of the world. With Sandra's discovery, new light was shed on old cases. Carver began to see the spiral for what it truly was. Not a random pattern of murder, but a meticulous, perverse homage. Each woman was a chapter in Ridgway's deranged scripture, and Sandra was the prologue. But one thing still gnawed at Carver. Why the shoes? She spent nights replaying interviews, reviewing footage, even combing through Ridgway's personal effects. Everything down to his childhood drawings. And then she found it. A crumpled photograph in the back of an old evidence file. A young Ridgway, 6 years old, standing beside his mother. She towered over him, smiling in a stiff, uncomfortable way. But it wasn't her face Carver noticed. It was her shoes. They were bright red, polished, perfectly centered in the photo. The same kind of shoes many of his victims had worn. Carver met with the profiler again. He wasn't just taking trophies, she said, dropping the photo on his desk. He was reenacting something from his childhood. His mother was obsessed with appearances, with cleanliness. She used to scrub him until he bled. Remember? The profiler nodded. You think the shoes are her? No, Carver said. I think they're what she never let him have. Control. He took what she flaunted. Ridgway's spiral ended where it began. But for the task force, the work didn't stop. New bodies were identified from the remains discovered near the ranger station. Names finally returned to families who had lived in torment for decades. The media swarmed, eager to close the book on the Green River Killer. But Carver knew the truth. Stories like Ridgway's don't end. They echo, they inspire. And then came the letter. It arrived at the precinct, addressed to Carver in shaky handwriting. The return address? None. Inside was a single photograph. A woman's feet, clean, bare, with a pair of red shoes placed beside them. No note, no explanation, just the image. Carver stared at it, her breath catching. Howell looked over her shoulder. He's still in prison. There's no way. This isn't from him, she interrupted. She flipped the photo over. A date was scribbled in the corner. It was from 2 weeks ago. Her heart pounded. The spiral might have ended for Gary Ridgway, but someone else had picked up the thread. And the forest wasn't done whispering. Not yet. The precinct buzzed with a mixture of triumph and unease. They had solved what was considered one of America's darkest mysteries. Gary Ridgway was behind bars. Dozens of victims had been named. Sandra, the first, had been found and laid to rest. But for Detective Molly Carver, the letter changed everything. That photograph, bare feet beside red shoes, dated just 2 weeks prior, was not just a reminder. It was a declaration, and she knew it. Someone was either taunting them or continuing Ridgway's legacy. Carver sat alone in the evidence room, turning the photo over and over in her hand. The lighting, the background, even the resolution, it was professionally done. Whoever had taken it wanted her to see every detail. The dirt under the feet, the slight scrape on one toe, the way the shoes were angled inward, like they were waiting for someone to step into them. It was a message. She called Ray Howell. You need to see this, she said. Minutes later, they huddled in a conference room, the photo enlarged on the screen. Could it be a hoax? Howell asked. If it is, it's from someone who knows exactly how Ridgway operated, Carver replied. They pulled Ridgway from his cell once more. He seemed older now, smaller. The weight of his own mythology was crumbling. Carver dropped the photo in front of him. He studied it without touching it. Not mine, he said finally. I told you, my story's over. Then who is it? Carver pressed. He smirked. There were people who admired what I did. Fans, pen pals, a few eager students. You think evil stops just because I'm in here? Her skin crawled. The profiler confirmed what she feared. Ridgway had received thousands of letters during his trial. Many were from women fascinated by him, but others had a darker tone. One letter stood out. It had been sent repeatedly, the same sentence over and over. "Where you end, I begin." No return address, no name, just that phrase. The FBI joined the investigation. The letter and the new photo were examined, compared, cross-referenced. The dirt on the feet was traced to a very specific kind of clay found in rural Idaho. Carver and Howell flew out immediately. They arrived at a sleepy town near the Snake River. Nothing in particular stood out until they drove past an old, shuttered photography studio. "Look familiar?" Howell asked, pointing to the backdrop visible through the dusty window. Carver's blood ran cold. It was the same as the photo. Inside, the place was abandoned but preserved. Cameras still sat on tripods. Photo prints hung from rusted wires. In a back room, a red dress hung on a mannequin. And below it, a pair of shoes. Red, glossy, unworn. They found a journal on the desk. Each entry was short, disconnected. But one page was circled in red. "The world forgot the shoes. I remember everything." And at the bottom, MR. The initials meant nothing to them. Not yet. Back at the precinct, Carver did what she had done for years. She dug. Through Ridgway's correspondence, old tip lines, internet archives, deep forums. She found him, Mitchell Rhodes. Age 36, quiet man. Had worked in a photo lab in Seattle for over a decade. Never married. No children. Clean record. But one thing stood out. He'd visited Ridgway in prison 3 times. All denied. All logged. But never flagged. She tracked Rhodes to a trailer just outside Tacoma. Surveillance was set up. No movement for days. Then one night, a light flickered on. Carver and Howell moved in. Inside, they found walls covered with Polaroids. Feet, shoes, dirt, grass, even riverbanks. No faces. Just the things Ridgway had once loved. And in the center of the room, an altar. Pair of red shoes, freshly cleaned. Rhodes wasn't there. But on the floor, another letter. "Where you end, I begin." And a new photograph. Carver recognized the shoes. They belonged to one of the unidentified victims found in the spiral center. He had been there, watching, learning, and now he had vanished. Months passed. The case became national news again. The Green River Legacy. Documentaries, articles, theories. But Carver stayed out of the spotlight. She worked in silence, driven by the echo she couldn't silence. One evening, she opened her mailbox to find a package. Inside was a single shoe, red, child-sized, and a note. "You forgot the first spiral." Carver sat on her porch, staring into the sunset, her hands trembling. She knew now. Ridgway hadn't started it. He had continued it. And someone else was still drawing spirals in the dirt. The ground would never be still again. For more chilling true crime content, subscribe to the channel.